we have here. We've already previously read it and made our own notes that we are bringing as our pre-work to the PLC meeting. So I'll open up the floor for conversation and I'll take some notes.
Just if you could, Sherry, would you mind showing the task for this particular essay just to kind of put it in context?
Yes, let's see. Here it is. The task is here. So they read and researched information about Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they wrote an essay where they compared and contrasted the civilizations.
I mean, do we want to begin by talking about some of the things that they're doing well or attempting to do well as writers?
Let's do that. Okay, great. What do you see?
Well, I will say I noticed, and they're working hard to create an introduction that is engaging the reader and using questioning to lead in the reader. So I thought that was, you could tell they'd had some instruction on introducing a topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I could also tell that throughout most of the essay, they're really working hard to include evidence from the text that they've been reading. And you could tell by the indication of the name of the text that they've been given instruction on how to actually embed information in their essay and to note what source it comes from. So I can tell that that's something that they had worked on and they're using evidence in their writing.
Okay, I agree with you on that for sure. And that's great to see at the 7th grade level. We definitely want that to be happening in all subjects. And of course, this one is in social studies. Anything else that are celebrations in sample 1?
Can we go back to the text for a second?
Absolutely.
I could also see that they've been told after each use of evidence that they need to talk about that evidence in some way. We also see a few notes on that commentary, but I could definitely see that they've been instructed to kind of interact with the evidence that they've been using for their writing.
Interacting with evidence. Okay. And I would say that, you know, really and truly what we're looking at here, the same things that we're saying are celebrations. I also see as almost, they all seem to be maybe introductory to these kinds of things. They are where I would expect a student to be maybe in a first attempt at some of these kinds of things, like incorporating evidence and that kind of thing. One thing in particular that I noticed that I think would probably need to be addressed, I love seeing the fact that there's document E, we're definitely referring to documents. This right here where it says according to document E, it says so a certain portion, maybe 25% of the workers were Egyptian. I don't have that document in front of me, but I would be concerned if maybe the student guesstimated maybe 25%. I don't know if that was in the document or if they just said, a certain portion, oh, maybe 25%. So that might be something that the teacher would want to make sure to address, that it definitely needs to be factual. You don't have to make it up to incorporate evidence. All right, what else did you notice that might be a place for growth for this student?
I think possibly revisiting the prompt to make sure that they're focusing on answering the question correctly, because I know the task asks for a compare and contrast. And when I look at the text or the student sample, that's not necessarily there. However, there are places where you could go back to the text and begin to ask the students questions that could possibly lead them to a true compare contrast. So
okay, so
get them there.
So is that a note for how to help the student, how to help the teacher get the student to move where you want them to go? is to ask questions.
I wrote down to conference with the student with the writing that they've done and go back to that prompt. So I definitely agree with you, Cindy, that there needs to be some, talking between the teacher and the student and back to that prompt, because the student really has some good ideas that you can tell are relevant. But at the same time, there's still some things that the teacher, or at least the task asks for, that I think could be expanded on.
And I think that you made a good point, Sherry, when you said that as a 7th grade writer, they're really beginning to determine, what does evidence mean? How do I use it? What is its purpose? And so it's almost like that's where they're really working here as a writer. And that next step is almost getting them to be able to be comfortable with, okay, now I get it. I can try and begin to incorporate evidence. Now, what is this compare contrast thing? Like, what do I do with that? Like, where do I go to find out, what the other civilization said and did and believed? And I think that you've got to celebrate what they did well, but then also take them to that next level and to remind them that, okay, here's what, like Raquel was saying, this is really what I'm asking you to do, or what we want you to be able to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing you say there is that one of the teacher notes would be, especially when you're assessing that they're maybe at an introductory level of what you're trying to show them how to do to practice to get better, is that it's really important to help the students unpack all the layers needed of the task. Thank you. Because this task does not only ask them, they're going to have to use evidence, which is somewhat introductory at this, what the kind of evidence he's asking for here. And then also the idea of making sure that compare contrast is its own layer in thinking about it. Okay. To me, one of the things that I see in sample 1 of this student is the student doesn't, even though they had documents of some kind, it doesn't seem like the writer has a clear focus of what they're trying to prove. If you're really only trying to write about that you believe the paid workers built the pyramids, then I can see where you might say the same thing kind of over and over again in your paper and not really have a whole lot to say. Once again, that going back to that task and actually trying to answer the actual task would help a lot. So let's see.
I wrote down to ask student the purpose for writing, because I thought that would help in the repetitive nature of the writing. If they were to clearly define, what are the reasons I am writing this? What are the ideas I'm trying to get across in the paper?
Okay. Now let's move on to the second sample, because this is the first sample, and we'll do the same thing with sample 2. And then I want us to address that right-hand column about notes for the teacher instructionally. How could we help if this was our colleague, which this is one of our colleagues actually, and help them to take next steps instructionally that might move the students to where they really want them to be. Because I don't think there's any doubt this teacher's trying to get students to write in the discipline and about content, which is wonderful to see. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is a draft from same student, student 1, example 2, later in the year. What were some of the things that you noticed as celebration for sample 2? For sample 2.
One thing I did notice is that in the first sample, they just referred to the document as document E, or this time they were specific about where they found the information. They noted the name of the source in their lead-in to the citation. So you could tell they were becoming more comfortable with using evidence in their writing.
Mm-hmm. The fact that there are lead-ins, it's starting to be a little bit smoother. You can see that they're starting to blend a little more and get more comfortable with that.
And even if you compared the two, not like, looking at this introduction or the beginning versus the other, you could see the development. I mean, the students' ability to develop thoughts and ideas is immensely improving from that first paper to this paper. So they're becoming comfortable with writing about the content, and that's pretty amazing.
I could tell from the introduction that there was a lot more thought in the planning stages of this writing, just because of the ideas present in the introduction.
So where would we want to take this student now that we see where they are at this point? What areas for growth did you see from the second sample?
One thing that I saw was within one paragraph, the student was working with, I guess it's the second paragraph.
Okay.
I saw where they were supporting their thoughts and ideas with excellent evidence, and they were talking about, you know, what type of leader he was and why. But then it's almost like that analysis piece, like as far as explaining what the evidence meant within that paragraph before moving on to that next idea. It's like getting, and I think it would be so, and not easy, but you could sit down with that student and show them exactly, you know, or ask them questions to lead them to say, okay, can you explain that further? What does that mean? And have them verbally tell you and then transfer it to their writing. And then I think they could take the next thought or idea that is within that same paragraph and then elaborate on that even more. And they could begin to see how the essay contains more information the more they elaborate, the more they analyze, the more they explain their evidence. Because I think they understand that next step. They understand, okay, this is how I use evidence. And now they've got to get that next step where they're trying to figure out now how do I explain that? How does this all relate in this beautiful little paragraph I'm creating?
And even my juniors, that was something that we worked on and struggled with. So to see seventh graders at the stage where they're ready to move to that next level, and this is what's next for them, that's pretty exciting to think about. 8th, 9th, 10th, that 11th grade teacher really should be able to see a marked difference with the continuation of the development of this student as a writer before they get to them in 11th grade.
I really liked in that particular section that you could see a lot of growth from the first paper to the second paper just in the commentary on the evidence. In the first paper, you had a short sentence after the evidence, whereas in this paper, you have 2 to 3 sentences. So you know that they've practiced talking about evidence, and they've clearly been instructed to really try to explain why they're using this evidence. But like she said, I think that this has a lot of potential for growth in that area, even though you can tell that they've clearly worked on it.
Okay, and I think you bring up a really good point. That's why I moved over to this side, Raquel, because I don't want us to lose it. That maybe there's been some instruction in how, and by talking out before they write in between that first paper and this one, so that students had the opportunity to practice out loud, because I know that's actually been happening in his classroom, and it's one of the things that he's really been trying to develop in students. So that's a neat point that you bring that out there. I want to add to what we've been saying and the difference between the two. First of all, obviously, we're starting to see that expansion happen in those developments of ideas. If you just look at length, the length of this looks like a body paragraph. There's more that they had to say in what they're doing here in this second one. But I would think that a next step for this student, now that they're starting to get the hang of how to do some of this, is an organizational piece. Maybe giving them some practice with some structure of a little more planning before they write. There's obviously he's thought out this student has thought out some of the things they were going to write about, but organizationally we seem to not have maybe multiple reasons, and then supporting each one of those with evidence. And I think if you put that structure piece on there for the student to think about what their thesis is, we're seeing much clearer focus. And then body paragraphs, though, designed by reason, and then what evidence goes with that, I think you would see the whole piece start to come together. But I wondered if this is a pattern that the teacher is seeing across the board in the students. Maybe they're at different levels of understanding that, but everybody seems to have the same patterns. I'm wondering if maybe the teacher could do a series of mini tasks specific to developing a body paragraph. And then maybe and smooth samples or examples of incorporating evidence. And so I think I've moved us over to this side here. I would love to see this student and what they think of their own writing from the first sample to the second one, wouldn't you? We actually mentioned a couple of other things. Backward outline their own paper. That would definitely be something that the teacher could do. Anything else that you would say are notes that you'd like to make sure that that our peers know or our thoughts in thinking about moving these students forward, because this teacher is really wanting to move students?
I think one of the key things that I saw from the first task to the second task was that you could tell that the students were practicing writing, because the writers seemed much more comfortable with the words on the page. In that first task, although, you know, they're attempting, they're trying, they're working towards it, and there were some really good things about that beginning piece of writing, you could see that they were still confused about what they were supposed to do, especially when you look back at the task and what they were asked to do. You don't really see that here. You could see like almost like a confidence on the page that wasn't there earlier, and that's critical. I mean, for students to be successful, they've got to practice writing, be comfortable with it, and you can tell that that's happening.
I think you make a really good point there, and I think that evidence isn't evidence in the first sample. Sorry, I think that you make a really good point. This to me ties into this part right here. I think that instructionally, I can see that there had to have been some opportunities for kids to do things out loud before they wrote. To get that confidence. Let me say it out loud. Let me think it through out loud and talk it over with you. And then I can go to my paper. And I think we're seeing the fruit of that when we get to this second sample, that's been happening regularly in this classroom. That's a really good point, Cindy. Well, the other thing that will be, that's a component here that I want us to consider before we close out today is the fact that there are next steps. What do we do next?